Good morning. Today's daf is daf Nun Dalid in Masechet Menachot. We are the last three words on Nun Gimel Amabet. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. So, um, uh, we, you know, we've been talking about the fact that there are two exceptions to the general rule that all of Menachot, all mincha offerings are matzah, and you do not use any leavening, and you not do not allow the mixtures to leaven. There are two exceptions to that rule. The 10 loaves of a toda, 10 of the loaves of a toda that are chametz out of the 40 loaves, 10 of them which constitute half of the weight, but they're one quarter of the number. That's those are the loaves of the toda, the chametz loaves of the toda, and the shtei alechem, the two loaves that are brought with two seirim on well, no, not a sirim, two kvasim on Shavuot. Those also are leavened bread, and so those are the two exceptions. And as we pick up at the very end of the last line of Nun Gimel Amabet, the Gemara notes that there's a limit on what one may use to leaven the bread, or at least there's a debate about the issue. So let's take a look. Tana Rabbanan. So the Brisa tells us, Ein michmitzin b'tapuchim, that we do not create leaven. We do not use the as a leavening agent apples. Now, actually, it's probably not 100% clear that apples are what is meant by tapuchim. Some people may say that it is actually an esrog, but in any event, whatever it is, we're going to go with the apples translation because that's the way it's translated today. But in any event, ein machmitzin, you're not allowed to use that. And Rashi explains, last Rashi on Nun Gimel Amabet, ein machmitzin l'shtei alechem v'toda. You don't use that in order to create the chametz loaves of either the shtei alechem or the toda. B'tapuchim, you're not going to use the apples to do it. Delo havi chametz ma'alya, because it is not a good leavening agent. So the idea is that you want to make sure that it's fully leavened, and this won't do that job, and therefore that's why you're not supposed to use the apples. Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Amru. Now we're on the top of that line of Nun Daled Amud Aleph, and now this going into the second line. Machmitzim, he says that you can use the apples. And Rav Kahana Masila Rabbi Chanina ben Taraja. So Rabbi Kahana said it's not Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel who said that you can use apples, but rather Rabbi Chanina ben Tarajon. So Kaman Ozla Hadatnan. So now that we have this debate, we want to understand who the author is of this anonymous of this following Mishnah. This Mishnah, which is in this is a Mishnah which is in Trumot, and so that's the question. Trumot Perek Yud Mishnah Bet, where we say tapuach sherisku. If you have an apple that's been crushed, unitano betocha isa, and you put that crushed apple into a dough. And Rashi tells us, very important, end of the top line in Rashi on Nadalat Amud Aleph, Tapuach Shel Truma. You have it's an apple that is from Truma, which of course makes total sense because this is from the 10th parak of Maseches Trumot. And you have that crushed apple of Truma and you put it into dough, and Rashi says, Sherisku, you crushed it, Vinasnu le'isas chulin. That's the important word in that next Rashi, is that we're talking about non-truma dough, the chimsa, and now the truma apple caused the truma dough to become chametz. Hare zo asura. Now you're not allowed, if you're not a Kohen, that is, you're not allowed to eat that dough because that dough has been affected by the truma. And so the truma, which cannot be eaten by a non-Kohen, makes it so that the dough cannot be eaten by a non-Kohen. So come on, Who is that like? Is it like our Tanakama, who we're going to refer to as the rabbis, the Rabbanan, or is it like Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel? Or according to Rav Kahana, it's Rabbi Chanina ben Terajim, but we're going to refer to it as Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. So, Lema Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel hu v'lo Rabbanan. Maybe we should say that it is Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel and not the rabbis. After all, the rabbis say that the apples shouldn't be used in connection with the mincha offering. And so, given the fact that we're not supposed to use it, maybe it's because it really has no effect. And so that's why you're not supposed to use it. Whereas, of course, Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel says it works completely. It works certainly sufficiently. And so since it works in both cases. In one case, it works to make the lechem, the shtei halechem, and the toda into leavened bread, and in the other case, it has the truma juice is going to cause the non-truma dough to be treated like truma. So, it works out perfectly. Doesn't that make the most sense? No, the Gemara says it doesn't have to be that way. Afilu tema rabbanan. You can even say that the rabbis who say that the apples do not work with respect to the korbanei mincha of the shtei alechem and the toda, you can still say that they would agree with the statement in Maseches Trumot, Perek Yud, Mishnah Bet. Nehi de chametz gamar lo havi, because it's not going to be chametz gamar. It's not going to be total chametz when it comes to and that's why you can't use it for the korban toda or for the shtei alechem, but nuksha miyahavi, but sort of deficient chametz, it will, or defective chametz, that'll still be. So the point is it's not that it won't have any effect. That's not what the Tanakama is saying in the brisa that we quoted at the very beginning of today. No, the Tanakama is just saying it's not going to be great chametz. And when we're offering a korban, we want great chametz when it's a korban toda or shtei alechem. So that ends that discussion. Now, we saw back in the first chapter of Menachot that for many mincha offerings, the Kohen will perform a kamitza. It'll be almost like a karate chop into the dough slash flour, and he'll then wrap his fist, the middle for three fingers. He'll use the top finger to rub off the top, the bottom finger to rub off the bottom, and what's left between his three fingers and his palm, that is the kometz. And so knowing that, Rabbi Ilah says the following: Amar Rabbi Ilah, ein lecha hakasha lekamitza yotzer miminchas chote. The toughest thing to get a kamitza, and we're going to see that what it really means is a full kamitza, is when you're dealing with a minchas chote, a sinner's mincha. Because remember, a sinner's mincha has no oil, has at the moment no water, and so all you're doing is you're putting your hand into a raw flour. You're going to close it up, and then you're going to wipe away at the top and the bottom. And Rashi explains, minchas chote chariva. It's dry. The kasha likmotz, and it's going to be difficult to do the kamitza. Shelo yehei kometz chaser, because it's hard for the kometz to not be missing something. Kishahu mochek begodel milamala, when you wipe away the stuff at the top, ubeetzba'o ketana, and with your pinky, you do it with your thumb at the top, and with your pinky milamata at the bottom. Nosher min hakemach yoter midai. You're going to end up wiping away more than you necessarily need to. Now, I think, although that's the way Rashi interprets it, I think that at least for me, the way I'm understanding it is at the end of the day, you do have a little bit of a hole, even if you're putting pressure on the flour. If the flour is really refined, it almost flows like water, and so it could just fall right out. So trying to keep it when you're doing this action, and you have both air coming in from the top and air and the possibility for the flour to come out from the bottom, it's going to be hard to retain it all in your hand. So now, but Rav Yitzchak, the next opinion, Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi Amar, Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi says, and now, by the way, Rav Yitzchak's name is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down in the Gemara on the Dalet Amud Aleph. Rav Yitzchak bar Adini Amar, Minchas Kote, Megabla b'mayim u'ksheira. You know what? There's a great way to solve the problem. Just add a little bit of water. The little bit of water will make it doughy, and now it will stay together. It'll stay together. You'll be able to wipe off a little bit at the top, a little bit at the bottom, and what's in your fist is going to stay there, and so you don't have to worry about it falling out of the bottom. So maybe what are they really arguing about? The meaning, why doesn't Rabbi Elah agree that you could use water? Should we say that they're arguing about the following? Demar savar kamot shehein misharinan, umar savar lekamot shahayu Misharinan. Maybe what you could say is the argument is about the following. Remember that we saw in our Mishnah the question of when you add a little bit of water, you end up with a mixture of flour that is denser than flour without the water. And if you add too much water, so then it's going to be looser. And so here's potentially the debate that according to Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, who says that don't worry about adding water, he says when you think about the kamitza, you focus on what you have right now in your hand. And right now in your hand, you have a kamitza volume of the minchas chote, because that's what you have in your hand, because all of that you have in your hand is minchas chote, maybe with a little bit of water mixed in, but it's a minchas chote, and so you're done. It's totally fine. It's okay whether it's too dense and you have extra flour or not dense enough and you have too little flour. The bottom line is you have in your hand a kamitza of volume, and we focus on what you have right now in your hand. And whereas maybe what Rabbi Elah is saying the following: look, you need to have a kamitza volume of flour. That's what we focus on. And now that you added water, either it's going to be denser than flour and you'll end up with too much flour, or you're going to be less than dense than flour and you'll end up with too little flour. But the bottom line is you need to focus on what the flour used to be in order to figure out whether you have the proper kamitza. So maybe that's what we're talking about. And Rashi helps us out. So now that I've done it outside, we can look at Rashi inside. Rabbi Yitzchak Savar Kamot Shehu. Achshav. Rabbi Yitzchak says, focus on what, and Rashi does us the favor of telling us which opinion says which, because here it said only Mar Savar, and now he's telling us which. Rabbi Yitzchak would say, look at what it is now. Misharina lekometz have le kometz, and you measured out a kometz, so it's a kometz ma'alya, and it's a good kometz. Rabbi Elah Savar lekamot shehein. You look at what it was. Ki'ilu haya kemak misharinan. You look at if it was actual flour and see how much flour you have. V'nimtza yeser o chaser, and you end up with having too much or too little. De'i ava hi ha'isa chaser nafcha, because if in fact you had it was a thick dough and it's missing some swelling, so then kamale kometz, and you took a kometz amount of soles yoser, you'll end up having too much. Mish'im haya hakemach, from what you would have if it was plain flour. V'imrachu he, and if it was loose, well then nisraba nacho, it's going to end up having swollen a little bit. B'malei kometz, and now when you take a full kometz, the chaser salaso, you're going to be missing flour, and so as a result, you might be missing or have too little. And so it's not going to work. So maybe we could say that that's what this argument is about. No, it's a much simpler argument. And this is what I would have thought actually naturally. Really, everything follows the way things are now. And here's what they argue about. Demar Savar, Rav Yitzchak Bar Avdimi says, my chareva mishemen. When we say that it's got to be dry from oil because that's what you put in a typical mincha. But it doesn't have to be dry from water. Umar Savar Chareva Mikol Davar. And the other opinion, Rabbi Elah says, you know what? It has to be dry from everything that's liquid. It can't have any liquid in it. So that's what the debate is really about. So now that we've mentioned this debate about how things can change over time, the Gemara quotes a Mishnah in Uktzin that addresses when do we do the measurement. So Tanan Hasam, we learned a Mishnah, Uktzin Perik Bet, Mishnah Chet, Basar Ha'egel Shenispach. If you have the meat of a calf that swelled and now it's sufficiently of the size, it's an egg size volume, so it can create tuma and convey tuma to other things. Ubesar zikena shenismaech. Or if you have meat of an old animal that shrank, and so now it is less than an egg's volume and therefore no longer able to convey tuma. Mishta'arin likamot shehain. You measure them likamot shehain. Now, the Kamot Shehain is going to mean as they were, but we're going to see that there's about to be a debate. And the key language is the difference between Kamot Shehain and Likamot Shehain. Kimot Shehain is as they are now. Likamot Shehain is as they were. So Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yochanan, Amrei. So those three opinions say Mishtarin Kamot Shehain. You do it as they are now. And again, remember, we generally will paskin like Rav and Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yochanan as a group over their bar pluktas. Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Reish Lakish Amri. So the three of them say no Mishtarin Kamot Shehain. You focus as they were. Now we're going to see that this machlokes may not be as simple as all that. And Rebbe will have an explanation that will offer a different thing. But the bottom line is we end up having the following debate. It seems like three opinions say you measure things as they are now, and three opinions say no, you focus on what they were. So Meisvei. So we're going to have a series of three questions to see whether we could prove who's right in this debate. And in the response to the second question, we are going to potentially modify the nature of the debate. So Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. Basar ha'egel shelo haya bo kashir. So if you have calf meat that doesn't have the right volume, the tafach va'amad al kashir, and now it's swelled and it does have the right volume, tahor l'sha'avar. What it touched in the past is going to be tahor because it was too small to convey tuma. V'tamei mikan la'aba, and now it's going to make things tamei going forward. So doesn't that clearly say that you focus on how it is now and not on what it used to be? So what Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon, Bari Rebbe, and Rabbi Reish Lakish would say is midarabanan. They would say, no, that's only rabbinic. Well, ihaki ema seifo. Well, what about the next line in that brisa? Doesn't that next line show that we cannot be talking about some kind of rabbinic decree? V'chein b'pigol v'chein b'nosar. That similarly, when it comes to pigol and nosar, that presumably what we understand at the moment now, if you tell me that we're all talking about a biblical thing, hainu de'ikol pigol v'nosar. Well, then it makes sense that we're going to say the same thing about pigol and nosar, meaning that if you were to eat the amount of meat that was pigol and nosar that used to be too little and is now the right size, we will say that if you eat it now, you have violated the biblical prohibition and you are chayav kares. Ella I amrat derabanan. If you, on the other hand, if you tell me that the treatment of something that was too small and now becomes the right size is that it only conveys tuma derabanan, Pigol v'nosar b'derabanan mi'ika. Is there any prohibition of eating pigol or nosar that is only rabbinic? There isn't such a prohibition. And so as a result, how do you understand this? And so doesn't it mean that we have to be talking about biblical and we have to be talking about pigol and so the pigol and nosar is talking about eating it? No, it does not have to be that. Ema v'chein betumas pigol v'chein betumas nosar. No, we could say that we're talking about the tuma of pigol and the tuma of nosar. And Rashi tells us, take a look at Rashi, last of the narrow lines on Dalet Amud Aleph, v'chein betumas pigol v'nosar, dekaimalan beparaketz tzolin, because we say in that chapter in Psachim, Daf Pei Hey Amud Aleph, hapigol v'anosar mitamin es hayadayim, that if you touch something that is pigol or nosar, it will, even though there's no tuma on it, it will treat it as if it's tuma derabanan, and it makes your hands tuma. And we know that it's only tuma derabanan because it's only making your hands tame. Because we know that tuma does not ordinarily limit itself to what touches it. Ordinarily, if you touch tuma, if you touch something that's actually tame, and you become tame, well, then your whole body becomes tame, and you need to go through a full process. It's not enough to just wash your hands. But tuma derabanan is, and by the way, tuma derabanan is why we wash al tilas yadayim in connection with hamotzi and things of that sort, because it's a remembrance of this concept, which we don't generally keep in today's world, but is an idea that we want to preserve a remembrance for. So, mitamin esayadayim afilu lo nagan behen tuma. Even if the tuma never touched either the pigol or the notar, we treat it as enough to cause your hands to become tameh. Mishum chashte kahuna, because we're worried about the kohanim, that the kohanim are going to not be careful about it, and as a result, it might become tameh. And so we're going to say that we're going to, as a concern, we're going to, and we don't want the kohanim to just, leave things over and that'll be okay. So you leave things over and eventually it gets burned. No, when you leave things over and now you have to go and burn it, your hands are going to be tameh, and that means that you're going to have to go through a tahara process. You're going to have to wash your hands, and that's going to end up meaning that you may miss out on having certain korban meat. And so as a result, that's going to be enough of a warning to you to help diminish the incentive for you to not be careful and to allow things to become notar or pigol. As is explained over there in Psachim, the ka'amar basar egel shall pigol o nosar. If you have some calf meat that is either pigol or nosar, shalo haisa bo kibetza, it didn't have an egg's volume, the tafach, and now it got bigger, v'amad al kibetza, and now it's an egg size. Tameh. So then your hands, if you touch it, will become tameh mikanu laba, from now and going forward. Midrabanan, from the forward, l'tameh et hayadayim, causing your hands to become tameh. That's what when we say v'chein b'pigol v'chein b'nosar, that's what we're saying. We're saying that the pigol and nosar is going to also make your hands tameh. So, and why would I need to tell us that, given the fact that we already said that it works with respect to the main tuma, that if it was actually tameh and it got bigger, well, then we would say that it also would, of course, make your entire body tameh midirabanan, because I would have thought the following. Hoel v'tuma pigol, v'tuma nosar derabanan he. Since that whole concept of your hands becoming tameh is all rabbinic, and the concept of something being too small and then becoming large enough, conveying tuma, is also rabbinic. Kulei hai b'derabanan lo ka'avid rabbanan. Maybe the rabbis wouldn't make a rabbinic rule regarding it. Meaning, once they're making the rule that something that was too small and now becomes the right size is able to convey tuma, maybe that would only be true for biblical tuma and not for rabbinic tuma. So kamash malan, that's why this brisa is telling us that in fact it is going to even work with respect to rabbinic tuma. Okay, so that ended our first effort to try and prove that whether Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Yochanan are correct, or Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon, Berebi, and Reish Lakish are correct. We tried to prove that Rav and his cohort are correct, but we were unsuccessful. So,
How are we defining rabbinic tumah? There's a Mishnah in Chagiga which says that in a case, I'm not sure, the rabbinic tumah, if one's hand becomes tamei, the other hand does not become tamei.
yes,
For rabbinic tumah,
that is when,
regarding
so there's a
truma, for
difference
instance.
between here. So let's clarify. There are going to be effectively two kinds of rabbinic tuma. There is rabbinic tuma where the rabbis are applying the real concept of tuma, where it's something that is actually tameh, and you touch it and it was too small and it became large again, where they're going to say, you know what, your whole body is going to have rabbinic tuma because it was something that was tameh, and now, even though biblically it was too small originally, and we don't allow it to change its nature, we're going to, because we follow the original as per Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon, Bar Rebbe, and Reish Lakish. We're going to say that your whole body is tameh. Then there is a concept where there is no tuma present at all. And the rabbis say, because of the nature of the item that you're dealing with, it is of such that our concern is that either you won't be careful with it enough, or you won't be sufficiently careful with it, that the rabbis say, you know what, it is going to cause a rabbinic tuma. So meaning there was never any tuma present at all, and we're going to make it tameh, and that is the situation that you're talking about in Chagiga, where one hand can become tameh, and you don't even necessarily have the other hand become tameh, and certainly not your entire body. So there are two concepts of rabbinic tuma. One that would apply to your entire body. That's when they're applying rabbinic principles, where the rabbis are saying what was biblical tuma is now going to apply, but it's only applying rabbinically. And when you talk about part of your body, that's where the rabbis are creating a new tuma, where no tuma exists, but we're going to be concerned about tuma, and therefore say that we have to be careful, and we're going to cause your hands alone to become tameh.
Well,
So
how are
that's
they
a
saying?
very
How are
important
they
distinction.
creating the tumah?
They're saying it's tameh. It's out of thin air because the rabbis decreed.
See that the Mishnah there talks about the concept of truma. So that if right, so that if one's hand is tameh for rabbinically, whatever, it's a little vague. I mean, to understand it, that only that hand that would touch the truma would commit, but only that
Correct.
hand would be considered
Correct.
tamei.
Because it's that
If it's
hand.
as long as it's dry, the hand is dry. If the hand would be wet, it could make the other hand tamei.
Correct. Because the idea is that this is all a rabbinic, it's a figment of the rabbi's imagination, that there is no actual tuma present, and therefore the rabbis are creating effectively a new principle that will allow us to be more careful about the things that we do by saying our hands alone can be tameh. But there is no actual tuma present. When there is actual tuma present, well, then when the rabbis say that we have to be careful, they would apply the tuma to your entire body. So those are the two categories. All right, well, Tashma, effort number two. Basar zikna, you have some older meat, shahaya bo kashir, that originally had the right size, vitzamak pachot mikashir, and now it becomes less than a shear. Tamei l'sha'avar. This is a continuation of the last brisa, I think. Maybe not. But okay. In any event, this is maybe no, it's in a different brisa. Tamei l'sha'avar. It makes when it was the right size, it created tuma. The Torah mikan lo haba, and now it will not make any tuma going forward. So again, doesn't this show that Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Yochanan are right? That you focus on the way things are right now and not on the way things were. So Amar Rabba. Rabba offers an answer, and with this answer, we're going to change our whole discussion. We'll see that in a moment. Kol hechadem ikara havabe v'hashta lesbe. Look, when you had the right size, and now you don't have the right size, halesbe. There's not the right size. So everybody's going to agree, meaning the position of Shmuel and Reish Lakish and Rabbi Shimon Bar Rebbe is not talking about a simple shrinkage. That when you have something that was the right size and now it becomes smaller, everybody's going to agree that right now it can no longer convey tuma. V'kol hecha demikara lo havabe v'hashta havabe midrabanan. And you know what? Everybody agrees that if it originally was too small and now becomes large enough, everybody agrees that in that case, it is only going to create tuma rabbinically because it never was the right size. It was, I mean, when it started, when it became tame, it wasn't the right size. And so as a result, we're not going to have something suddenly create tuma de oraisa. So that's the other opinion. And what are they arguing about as we turn to Nadalid Amabed? Ki pligi, where are they arguing? Kagon shahayabo kashir. So originally it was the right size. So it had the ability to convey tuma biblically. Vitsamak, and now it became less than the right size. And so everybody would agree that if you touch it now, you're not going to be tummy. But the chazar v'tafach, and now it went back to the right size. It got big again. Demar savar yesh dichlei beisura. The Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon and Reish Lakish, they all agree that in fact it will that once it's pushed off, meaning once it no longer creates tuma d'oraisa, it can't recreate itself. Umar Savar and the others, namely Rav, etc., and Rabbi Yochanan, they would all say, "Ein dichoy be'isura." There is no pushing off, and it can come back. And as a result, if you touch it again, it would become tameh. We can take a look at Rashi, top Rashi, Nun Dalid Amabet, Ubas Kipligi. Ubasar. Now Rashi's going to do something really quite remarkable here. A lot of opinions are going to disagree with it, but here's what he's going to do. Ubasar ha'egel shenispach. So he's going to Rashi's modifying the original Baraisa, right? The original Brisa said Basar ha'egel shenispach. Ubasar zikna zikena shenisma'ach, that if you have meat of a calf that got bigger or meat of an old animal that shrank, mishtarin kamod shehain. I mean, debating on who says it, but according to the Rav's opinion, it would be you focus on what they are right now. And so how do we understand this? Ubasar ha'egel shenispa. When we're talking about the calf that became bigger, Asefekai. We're referring to the end of the process. Shechazar likamot shahaya. It was big. It somehow got small, and now it got big again. So that's the situation we're talking about. And basar zekena shenismait. And when we're talking about the older meat that became smaller, amitzia. It's on the middle case. It got at first it was big enough, then it got smaller. And then it got bigger again. Kai. V'hachikamar. And here's what the Brisa is telling us. Afal gav shenismoed. Kashir sheyeshbo achshav misharinan. Even though each of these things got smaller, Rav would tell you that you focus on what it is right now. Ho'il v'kvar hava behen. Since it used to have the right size, nami hai shiura umichayev midoraisa. It now has the right size also, and we can say that you're going to be liable from the Torah. The lo amrinan b'shah shetzamko, and we don't say that at the moment that it got smaller, nidcho me'isurayu, that it no longer had any prohibition associated with it. V'havale kamisha lo haya bo mitchila, and we'll treat it as if it was never the right size even from the beginning. V'hashta isa upater midoraisa. And now, if we did do that, we would say it would be totally exempt from the Torah. Rabbi Shimon, Reish Lakish, and Rabbi Shimon and Shmuel, it skips Shmuel here, but it should be Shmuel also. Savri yesh dichoy b'isurun. They would all say that there is a pushing off when it comes to the prohibition. But kevan de idchi, once it got pushed off, it gets pushed off permanently. V'lo yikabel od tuma midoraisa ela midorabanan. And all that you would have here is only rabbinic tuma. So again, three kinds of cases. Case number one, it was small and it became big. Everybody agrees that there's only rabbinic tuma because there was never biblical tuma there when it became tameh. So as a result, it's only going to be rabbinic. It was big and it became small. Everybody agrees that now that it's small, it's not making anything tameh and it's not going to create a chiyuv because it's too small. Everybody agrees, both those cases. The case that
When
they
did it
argue
become
about,
tummy? In either of
what?
those cases, you said in the first one it was small and it
And got
increased in
big.
size. But what was the actual moment in time that this product,
Oh,
quote unquote, became tummy?
a great question. The first size that I mentioned is when it became tameh. So it was when I say it was small and then got big, it means it was small when it became tameh and then it got big. So
But it
it
was
was
too small to become tummy. So how can we say it was tummy?
exact. Well, no, wait. It was too small to convey tuma. It's not too small to be tameh.
Uh,
Okay, very important distinction. Thank you for highlighting that distinction. Okay, too small to convey tuma, and it became tameh, and now it got big. Well, it was too small to convey tuma. Everybody agrees that it will convey tuma, but only rabbinically. It was big enough to convey tuma, and now it's small, and now it's too small to convey tuma. Everybody agrees it does not convey tuma at all because it's too small to convey tuma right now.
it lost the tumor, quote unquote. It
It
lost the
lost the
ability.
ability to convey tuma.
Uh-huh.
Lost the ability to convey tuma. Yes, that's exactly right. And we know that that's the case. Remember, we saw this. The most extreme is where it could actually lose its tuma status. Remember, we saw a few days ago, maybe it was a few weeks ago at this point, that if you had a kli that was tame,
You
and then
break
it,
it. Break it.
what?
You break it.
And then you break it, what is it? The status? It's no longer tameh at all, right? So that was the most extreme situation. Here it's still tameh; it just no longer is able to convey tuma. So okay, but the bottom line is, and then where is the debate between Rava and his fellows on the one side and Shmuel and his fellows on the other? Is when it was big enough when it became tameh. It got smaller and then it was big enough, and that's Rabba's explanation of this debate. That Rav will tell you that look, it had a biblical status of being able to convey tuma. If it gets it back again, it's okay. It's just because it's nidcha, it's not dichui la'olam. Whereas Shmuel would tell you, no, once it loses that status, it got smaller. We'll treat it almost like it became tame when it was smaller. In fact, that's exactly what he's saying. He says we treat it as if it's so. As a result, it will only convey tuma rabbinically, and so that's the debate between Rav and Shmuel and their respective teammates. Okay,
And
so
Does Rav say that it does convey tumor then?
Rav it says it conveys tuma biblically,
Uh.
and Shmuel says no, it only conveys tuma rabbinically.
Well, generally, don't we learn that the Pesach Halacha is according to Rav and Dine Mamanot?
No, you got it mixed up.
Oh, it is?
Shmuel is the one that's get the halacha associated with Dine Mamanot.
Oh,
Rav is in the other situations.
Dine Nefashot.
In Dine Nefashot, etc. So the halacha is going to be like Rav in this situation. I mean, that would be how I would expect it to be.
What, this is Dine and Nefashot?
Yeah, well, of course, it's not Dine Mamonot. We're talking about Tuma
Oh,
and Isser. Absolutely. It's usually said as halacha karab beisurin and halacha shmuel b'mamon. I don't think that's exactly the right words, but it's something along those lines. And indeed, we saw relatively recently how Shmuel was referred to in connection as a melech, because of the concept of dina de malchusa dina, right? That was, and where do we apply dina de malchusa dina? Only in dine mamonos. Okay, so the Rabba's explanation, but now we're going to ask a question on Rabba's explanation. Is there really anybody who would say that there could be a full-fledged rejection of Isurin? After all, Vahatanan, we have a Mishnah. Kibetza ochlen shenicha b'chama. If you have a beta size of food and you put it in the sun, v'nisma'atu, and it shrinks, v'chein kizayas min hameis, and if you do the same thing, again, you're putting all of these things in the sun and they're shrinking to below the relevant size that we're about to say. So an olive of a dead person, kizayas min hanevela, an olive of a dead animal, ka'adasha min hasheretz, a lentil size of a sheretz, of a dead sheretz, as opposed to a larger animal, kizayas pigel, an olive size of pigel, kizayas notar, an olive size of notar, kizayat chalev, an olive size of chalev, tahorin. It now shrank in all of these cases because it was in the sun. It is tahor. Now, nobody disagreed with that. As we've modified, as Rabbah has modified the debate, everybody's in agreement that when it shrinks, we're totally fine. Here's the problem. The ein chayavin alehim mishum pigel v'nosar v'chelev, and you're not going to be obligated in pigel, nosar, or chelev. Hanicham b'kshamim v'tafchu. But now, if they got bigger again, tameyin. So then everything would be tamei. V'chayavin aleihem mishum pigel v'nosar v'chelev, and you would be liable. Now, note that different language here, because now it didn't say v'chein b'pigel and nosar. It says v'chayavin. So that's a language of liability that says that we're not talking about some kind of rabbinic tuma. We're talking about true isser. So to Yuvta Lamanda Amar Yesh Dichwe Beisurin. Doesn't that show that you cannot possibly have Dichwe Beisurin? So to Yuvta, you're absolutely right. That would refute the concept of Dichwe Beisurin. There is no Dichwe Beisurin. You can get back the concept of Isser. So that is effectively a problem to Rabbah's explanation. And so now we're going to try a third time to prove who is right in our debate between Rav and his cohort on one side and Shmuel and his cohort on the other. With Rav again saying that you focus on the current size, and Shmuel saying you focus on the prior size. Tashma torment te'enim ala grogros b'minyan, that you can take truma, and Rashi here says torment lav truma mamish, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Nundal and Bet. Torment lav truma mamish elamaiser. We're not talking about actual truma here. We're talking about meiser, and we will see why he says that in just a moment. So torment to Einan ala.
well, why is it a dechuya to Rabbah? It seemed like Rabbah was a compromise. He tried to mix them together and come up with a solution that satisfied everybody. So
Well, remember that according to Rabbah's explanation, for Shmuel and his cohort, if it was large, became small, and then got large again, you would not say that the biblical thing returned. And the problem is that we just showed there's the Baraisa that we just cited, or actually it's a Mishnah in Tahoros, Mishnah Perek Gimel Mishnah Dalid, that specifically says that if it was large enough, then it shrank, and then it got large enough, the Isurin returns. So that effectively undermines Rabbah's explanation
Of
because according
Shmuel,
to
of Shmuel, but not necessarily of Rav.
no, that's true. It does not necessarily, but remember, Rabbah's explanation was effectively trying to recharacterize the machlokas of Rav and Shmuel. And
Right.
the problem is that in that recharacterization, now Shmuel and his cohort are inconsistent with an explicit Mishnah, and you don't want to have that.
Right. So
And
I see
so
the problem is on B'tzad of Shmuel, not so much
yes, of
Rav.
course. The problem is B'tzad Shmuel, but we don't want to. But if you're going to give me an interpretation for something, you don't want to have any Amora disagree with an explicit Mishnah. And so you don't want to have Shmuel and his cohort disagreeing with an explicit Mishnah. How could they have said what you're trying to have them say, Rabbah, if that's true? So Rabbah's explanation is problematic.
But only B'tzad of Shmuel, though.
Yes, but Shmuel. But once you have a problem with the explanation, the whole explanation has a problem.
I understand. Well, okay,
Like,
but
because
so
how can
yeah.
he say that? How can he say that Shmuel and his cohort are disagreeing with the Mishnah? That's the question. So that's a refutation of the concept of saying that there would be anybody who would say that there's dichoy b'isurin because there isn't dichoy b'isurin. Okay,
So
so
we don't know
Tashma.
what Shmuel. Maybe we don't know what Shmuel actually said. What with this, or we because Rav is trying to
Yes, and
he's trying to
what
recreate or think about what Shmuel might have said or what his opinion could have
yeah,
been.
what you're highlighting is that what Rabbah still gave us, and the halakha according to Rabbah, according to following Rav's view, is correct. And I don't think anybody. I'm not disagreeing with that. Just to be clear, it's just his whole overall explanation creates a real problem for Shmuel and his cohort. So it's
Right.
a lot easier to understand it differently. So Tashma. But I mean, we don't actually have a great explanation. In the end, we're going to end up with effectively no. Well, will have to see how tomorrow plays out. But we don't have a great explanation yet. So Tashma, third effort, and here we're actually going in the opposite direction, and we're going to try and argue that who's right. Maybe Shmuel and his cohort are right because Tashma. Listen to the following: Torment to Einim ala Grogros B'minyan. That when you take truma, when you take meiser, as Rashi told us, and you do it from te'enim, which are the fresh. Rashi says lachim. Those are the
Figs.
moist figs. That's a fresh fig. Grogros te'enim yivashim, and grogros are what we call dried figs. Shinsamku the kavatsu that they dried up and they shrank or they shrank and dried up. So that's what the situation that we're talking about. And you do it b'minyan. What does that mean? So continuing on in Rashi, now we're on the Rashi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines down in Rashi. Eser te'enim al tishim. You would take 10 altishim grogros. You would take 10 fresh figs for 90 dried figs. Aval b'mida, if you were to use the measurement, low, you don't do that. Mishum dahavi b'maiser, you would end up taking too little meiser. Legabi minion, as compared to using the number. The key manit lehu legrogro techulin ulte'enim de meiser. Because if you're using if you're thinking about dried figs as your chulin, as what you want to be able to eat after you take the meiser, and you're taking the meiser from the fresh figs, lo tishtakach bekol eser grogros de chulin chada te'ena de meiser. You won't end up with you won't even end up with 10 grogros of chulin for one. You'll have more than that for one te'ena, for one fresh fig of meiser. Dekli demaxik meya grogros, because a vessel that holds 100 dried figs, lo machzik tvei minun teinim. It won't hold more than 50 fresh figs. So the idea is the following: if I'm using a measurement of volume to take my meiser, well then instead of taking one fresh fig for nine dried figs, I would be able to take one fresh fig for 18 dried figs because one fresh fig is the size of two dried figs and or even larger than two dried figs. So that's the problem. And obviously I want to be taking one out of every 10. So Amrat, so if we say this theory, Bishlam ala kamot shehain, if you focus on what it used to be, well then Misharin and Shapir, then everything works. Because when you take the one fresh fig and you're taking it for nine dried figs, we focus on what everything used to be, and what you're really doing is taking one fresh fig for nine fresh figs. They just happen to be dry now, but we're focusing on Lekamot Shehain, what it used to be, just like Shmuel tells us. So Ela'i Amr Kamot Shehain. But if you tell me it's not lit Kamot Shehain, but it's Kamot Shehain, well then we have a problem. Because if you're focusing on what it is right now, Havale Marba B'Masros, you're taking too much because the one of volume is way too much for the nine of volume of the dried figs. The Tanya, and this is a Tanya, not a Tanan, it's a Brisa, as is corrected by the Masoros Hashas. Hamarba Masros, if you take too much Meiser, Peirosab Misukanim, what you have left over is repaired. So if you, instead of taking one out of every 10, you took two out of every 10, well then the 8 that remain, you're totally fine with. That's fine. You can eat those because you took your trumas and meisers. But umasrosav mukul kalin. But your meiser is problematic because your meiser, where you took two out of every 10 instead of one out of every 10, Rashi tells us that meisros mikul kalot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom of the narrow lines of Rashi, tevel umeiser me'urabin. It ends up being tevel, which is unmeisered food, and meiser mixed up together. The chatzikav hachamishi, that the half of the 1/5, right? The 10%, the one half of what you took away, havi meiser, that is real meiser. The chetzio, and the other half, havi tevel, is a mixture. Kishar tua shebekri, just like what was in the pile of produce before you took it, because you haven't successfully removed the meiser from it. It's still mixed together, and so that's a problem. So,
it's mixed with what? It's mixed with
with the meiser.
Right. It's mixed with the meiser that you took on the one of them.
Yes, exactly.
One fig was the meiser, and the other one
is mixed with it, and it's tevel because it's not meiser, because you're not allowed to take too much meiser. So how can we understand it? So 1 second. So our response, and so doesn't this show that Shmuel is correct that we focus on the way things were? And the answer is no. Elamai, l'kamot shehain, you want to tell me that you focus on the way things were? Amos Sefer, what about the rest of that brisa? Because the rest of the brisa says, grogarot al tainim b'midah, that when you take dried figs for fresh figs, you use the volume. And again, that's in order to make sure that you have enough. So, for example, if you take if dried figs are always 1/2 the size of fresh figs, so if instead of taking one dried fig for 9 fresh figs, you'll need to take 2 dried figs for 9 fresh figs. So, shapir. Well, in that situation, you want to focus. It makes sense to focus on the way things are now because you're focusing on the current volume. But if you tell me you focus on the way things were, marba b'masroshu, you're going to end up taking too much meiser. So no matter what, this brisa has a problem. So Ella Hacha Betruma Gedola Askina. So you know what? We're going to say that this is talking about Truma Gedola. So when it said Truma, it meant Truma. And we're talking about Truma. And you know what's true about Truma? It's okay. You can take too much. It's all right. Remember, it didn't give us any proportions. So, and we know that one seed is sufficient for Truma. and we say that somebody who's generous gives 1/40th, somebody who's regular gives 1/50th, and somebody who's stingy gives 1/60th. The Resha Ba'in Yafa V'Seifa Ba'in Yafa. That in both cases, we're talking about somebody who wants to be generous. So as a result, the person wants to be generous with respect to if he's taking fresh figs for dried figs, he'll take one fresh fig for 9 dried figs, and because he wants to be generous. And if he take or one fresh fig for 49 dried figs. And if he wants to, and when he's taking dried figs for fresh figs, well, then again, he wants to be nice. So he'll take 2 dried figs for 49 fresh figs, or 39, depending on how generous he wants to be. But how can you tell me that it's talking about Truma Gadola, where we're talking about 1/40th, 1/50th, and 1/60th, because Amar Rabbi Elazar, at the very end of that brisa, says that Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi said, Abba, that my father Rabbi Yossi, Hayanotel Eser Garos, Shibimaktsua, Al Tishim Shibikalkala. He would take 10 fresh figs I'm sorry, he would take 10 dried figs from the maktsua, which is the device in which it got dried up, al tishim shibakalkala, for 90 that were in the basket. Now that is not being generous. That is viewing everything the same. So ve'i b'truma gedola eser maya binte. But if he's truma gedola, he doesn't need to do 10 out of 100. He can do 2 out of 100. So what's the 10 doing here? Ella hali betrumas meiser askinan. So it's all talking about trumas meiser. Now that's important to remember that there's the concept is the following. First, you take truma gedola. You take the 1/40th, 1/50th, 1/60th, and you give that away to the Kohen. Then you take the meiser and you take 1/10 of what's left and you give it to the Levi. And then the Levi who gets that 1/10, he gives 1/10 of what he got to the Kohen. So that Trumas Meiser is what we're talking about. But Abba Elazar ben
Was he a
Gomel,
Levi?
the Levi who gives it
I
to the
understand,
Kohen,
but was he himself a Levi?
was who? Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi?
Well, why would he be giving Trumat Meiser?
Maybe he's a Levi. That's what we're talking about.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Was he a Levi?
I don't know whether Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi
Because if
Yossi
he
was a Levi.
wasn't, it's not Shaykh, is it?
Well, I mean, yes, it would raise a question unless he was taking it on behalf of the Levi. So he was doing it on behalf of the Levi. But let's assume that he himself is a Levi. The Abba Elazar ben Gomel, and this is all following Abba Elazar. Why do we need to follow Abba Elazar? Because the Tanya Abba Elazar ben Gomel Omer, he says the nechshav lachem trumaschem, that you should reckon your truma, and this is dealing with both the truma. Bishtei trumos hakasam medaber. The Torah is telling us about both kinds of truma. Achas truma gedola, achas trumas meiser. Both the truma gedola and the truma meiser. Kashem truma gedola nitelas ba'omid. Just as when you take truma gedola, you're allowed to use an estimation. You don't have to do a formal count. Uva machashava, and you can do it just thinking about it. You don't actually have to do it orally or physically separating it. Kach trumas meiser nitelas ba'omid. So too, when it comes to taking the trumas meiser, you can also do it with estimation, machshava, and with thought. And just as Abba Elazar says that those two concepts apply both to Trumas Meiser and to Truma Gedola, Ma Truma Gedola ba'ayin yafa, Av Trumas Meiser ba'ayin yafa. Just as you could take Trumas Gedola and give a little extra, so too you can give extra with Trumas Meiser. And so that resolves the question, because actually what we're saying is the person is giving it with ayin yafa. And so as a result, we've explained that Mishnah. And so as a result, that Mishnah has nothing to do about whether we say kamot shahaya or likamot shahaya. Likamot shehain or likamot shehain, but meaning, do we focus on now, or do we focus as they are, or do we focus on how as they were? And the bottom line is that we're still stuck with that debate. Now we are in the middle. We will do a little bit.
It seems though that we can take extra from this.
Yeah, for truma, you can take extra according to Abba. According to that opinion,
But even
that's
for
exactly
Meiser, right?
What?
Even for mice, it seems like he could take extra.
No, no, no. Only Trumas Meiser, not Meiser itself. The Meiser itself, you cannot take too much extra.
Uh-huh. So it has to be exact then, more or
It has
less.
to be exact. That's exactly right. So we've explained
How are
now.
we say now? A question I have is how are we using even dried figs versus wet figs? Don't aren't we supposed to take the truma on the same product? Truma, mice, or whatever it is on
Well,
the
it is
same product?
considered the same product. It is
Well,
considered the same product.
it
That's that
is.
that yeah, as long as it's from the same crops, absolutely. You already dried some of them, but because remember you pick them over time. So it's not like they all get picked at the same day. So and you can wait to take the truma as long as you keep it all in a pile, right? As long as you keep it all in your storehouse, and you don't bring it into your house, you can wait to do the truma until the very end. So you may want to do that. It may make your life a lot easier to do it just, to calculate your taxes once as opposed to multiple
But
times.
I'm just, for instance, do we consider raisins the same as grapes? I mean, a comfort or prunes the same as plums?
Yes, I
Well,
mean,
it's a
certainly
it's
I
a
think from a bracha perspective, I believe that we do.
okay, but
And
is it really the same fruit? Because
and
it's
yes,
changed.
yes, I think the answer is yes. That
I
certainly
mean,
seems to be the
we
answer that the
consider
Gemara
we
is
have to
giving
give
right
them
now.
we give them a different name. It's maybe not the same fruit. Maybe
Yeah,
not.
that the answer to your question is that this Gemara is explicitly telling us that you can take truma from one on the other because they're all considered the same fruit. Now, the question of how you calculate it is a very important question, and we have not answered that question, and we're going to continue to go through the Baraisa, God willing, tomorrow. The recording for tomorrow is already online, so feel free to get it. It's not going to be a live session, Motzi Shabbos. I believe that Ellie is on the West Coast. And so as a result, feel free to check that out already today. But I believe that he will be live on Sunday morning at the regular time. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.